armed.
Oh my goodness. Well, I've just finished a nice chunky play session on Mythforce on the Nintendo Switch because I like to make sure I check these things to give you a performance review and we've got a lot to talk about. Thanks to the publisher for the review copy. Is Mythforce on Nintendo Switch currently worth you picking up? Well, my name's Mark Walker. If you enjoy this type of content, then tickle some buttons and leave a comment below. Now, let's find out. If you're unaware what Mythforce is, well, it's the latest game published by Aspyr and features 4 playable characters in a roguelite setting from a first-person perspective. We saw an early preview of it in a Nintendo Direct, and I've got to be honest, it looked amazing. It's like Dungeons and Dragons meets City of Brass, but we should probably skip all of that first and go straight to performance. Now, we're looking at a 30 frames per second target that seems to be using some type of VSync, and it can't keep 30 frames per second all the time, which is a real shame. The current build in fact has some significant performance drops. There almost hangs where the game seems to load in the background, and it's really annoying. Now, this is predominantly an online game, so performance is really key here, and it's just not good enough at the moment.
Impale.
Now, this is exacerbated if you decide to hop online with a random stranger. Obviously, this is peer-to-peer, there are no servers here, and that means you are beholden to the performance of your friend's internet. If you're the host, then great, but if you're not, well, issues will certainly be seen in conjunction with some of those performance issues. That's twice I said issues, because, oh, yeah. If you're playing solo, then it will maintain its 30 frames per second max for at least a little longer than it does when you're playing with someone else. But still, it's not a pretty picture. Visually, it's not native resolution, but it's not super low. Now, I know that's not the most scientific thing in the world, but realistically, I'm not counting pixels when it can't hit 30 FPS and maintain it. It's just not worth my time. With that said, there is some aliasing around the outsides of objects, and there are a few other visual glitches, like white streaks when you're going around the corners, and some of the animations of both your character and the enemies, they just look a bit half-baked. There is no gyroscopic support, so if you're someone that enjoys that in a first-person game, you won't find it here, and the default sensitivities are completely skew-whiff. Here's how you can set the game up to actually feel like it should, in my opinion at least. You need to drop down all of the accelerations to 0. Joystick acceleration's just rubbish when you're not using a mouse or keyboard. In fact, I remove it all the time. Drop that down. You also might want to drop down the other sensitivities, as you can see here. After this, it was much more enjoyable. Now, the default field of view is actually up to 92. I dropped that down to 90, which is pretty standard for first-person shooter games, but I'm thinking if you drop that down even further, there's a potential you could increase performance, but you're obviously losing a little bit of that peripheral vision. Load times aren't too bad, and actually the matchmaking works quite well. You can just choose quick game and it will automatically join you to someone else. Now, I do have to say that potentially a lot of my issues stem from the fact that I'm playing this game in the middle of the night here in the UK and there are no UK players online. Perhaps, and I'm being very nice here, if you're playing with people from the same area, I mean, I might well be playing with people from the EU, let's be honest, I could just be clutching at straws, but you might find things are a bit better. What I found though was, as you can see, not only did I have huge amounts of latency, around half a second, so shooting with the bow and arrow was pretty tricky, but the more we progressed into the game, the worse it tended to get, with it completely losing its mind by the end. And well, it just finished with a swan song and a lovely crash back to the desktop. It was the perfect time for me to finish. But I do want to speak about the actual game, because Mythforce does deserve some attention, because it's really fun when it's working, even with all these terrible performance issues. Now, you can choose one of the 4 classes. There's a hub area that basically lets you customize, upgrade and change your character in a number of ways. You can customize your weapon loadouts at the armory. You've got the bounty board, which is essentially ongoing passive quests. So, you know, kill a certain number of enemies, reach a certain level, and this will reward you with cash in the form of gold coins and the game's currency. You can purchase different emotes and voices as well as skins over at the boutique. The Conclave allows you to buy upgrades and perks, again using that diamond currency, and you can attune to your favourite trinkets, with some gold of course, to make it more likely that you'll find them in a run. That's a nice touch. Now, once you enter the world itself, there are 9 different episodes, and as I said, you can host an open game, which means anyone can join, or you can have it friends or invite only. Like many roguelites, it's based on segmented rooms with enemies flooding in, and once dispatched, it unlocks a small area where you can get an upgrade before you move on to the next. And there's also a moment here where you can revive any fallen comrades. Now, if players go down, you can actually do this with one of the strangest animations I've ever seen. It looks like you're patting them better, and there are chests dotted around that will give you some gold or other items. Now, each of your characters has different moves which have cooldowns attached to them. Playing as the archer, you've got a shot that sucks enemies into a vortex, the ability to essentially shadow step, becoming invisible for a brief amount of time, and then an electrocution shot. Now, when everything's going perfectly, it is a fun game to play. It's a little bit clunky, but it's fun. If you switch to a sword and shield, you can perform a block, and there's a parry attached to this, and then a light or heavy attack if you hold down the trigger. Despite the obvious technical issues in this build, the fact that I was still able to enjoy myself, and it does still have that addictive element to it, but with a real skill-based, fun progression system. It says a lot about what is here in Mythforce. It is just, as I've said many times before, it is just not ready yet. And that is where another negative comes up for me in its repetition. Even in just a few hours, the spaces that you move between, which seem to use some form of modular procedural generation, you just see the same things over and over, the same enemies, and it will require the same method to deal with. Now, of course, as you progress further into the game, I'm sure there'll be adding in new ones, but it's another aspect that doesn't feel quite finished to me. So if you happen to have picked it up already, then you're going to still find some fun, but undoubtedly you will have experienced already some of the issues I've spoken about. For everyone else though, I would strongly suggest waiting for an all patched up episode, which is never a nice thing to have to say, but it is what it is. I can only go on the build that I'm playing in front of me, and the fact that it was all rounded off after a 3-hour play session with a nice crash, well, it speaks volumes. Let me know in the comments, have you already been playing this one? Is it one that interests you? And as always, I do hope this has been of some use. If you enjoy the content, or if this was useful, click all the buttons, let me know, and if not, let me know that as well. Thanks to our Patreons, our members, and to all of you that enjoy the content. We hit 100 million views today. That is just ludicrous. So from Glen and I, thanks very much. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!